In this series, I'll be doing a hour by hour comparison of Hollow Knight and Silksong. So buckle up because we're getting started. Starting out in Hollow Knight, you start in the tutorial area, and Hollow Knight's tutorial area is pretty straightforward. You only have a couple of pill bugs to attack, and it only tells you how to heal. And if you're crafty, you realize early on that there's a section that you can pogo on, which I'm convinced that that's what that portion is there to teach you. However, on my very first playthrough of Hollow Knight, I didn't learn until I made it to the fungal waste that I could even pogo at all. In Silksong, it moves a lot quicker. One other thing that's worthy of note is that the tutorial of Hollow Knight also feels a lot more melancholy. After all, you are in a decaying kingdom. Silksong, by comparison, is a much more lively environment, a much more beautiful, and also Hornet obviously moves significantly faster and is much more acrobatic, being able to perform ledge grabs straight away. Another thing of note is that the water in Silksong doesn't damage you at all. And also, you have your first boss encounter in the tutorial area. And both games are similar in that you encounter your first NPC within the first, say, 10 minutes of the game. However, the first NPC in Hollow Knight is the Elderbug, who is rather lonely, for lack of a better word. In the starting area of Silksong, the first NPC that you meet is rather lively and actually concerned for Hornet. Now let's go ahead and talk about the music in the first two starting areas. In Hollow Knight, the music of Dirtmouth, Dirtmouth. I've always said Dirtmouth. Anyways, is really good at creating this sense of foreboding and also more melancholic. Whereas Silksong, the music seems to be a bit more atmospheric, similar to Breath of the Wild, where it's just kind of there. It doesn't make a strong impression to me. And once the night drops into the Forgotten Crossroads, the music is a little more atmospheric, and it's really clear that Christopher Larkin really knows his sound design, because instantly I was taken back to 2020 when I first played Hollow Knight and how just immersed I felt in Hallow Nest. And Silksong is no different in that way. However, there's no nostalgia lenses there because it's obviously still a pretty fresh game. Now, the combat in Hollow Knight is more or less pretty straightforward so far, with there just being your standard attack, and then once you make it a little further past the false champion, you get your first magic ability. Hornet, however, she is much more acrobatic and agile. Pogos and her sprint attack, well, once you get it, combo very nicely. And if you're feeling up for a challenge in Hollow Knight, you can find the Brooding Moloch pretty easily, and that is your first real challenge of a boss. The False Knight is actually pretty straightforward, even though in my first playthrough I struggled with him quite a bit, because Hollow Knight was probably the hardest game that I had ever played until 2022 when I started streaming and I went through the entire Souls catalog. While we're talking about combat, let's talk about the healing. As we all know, in order to heal for Hollow Knight, you have to stop, hold B, and hope you have enough time to just heal one mass. Hornet, you can heal in the air or on the ground, and you heal 3 masks at a time. However, this is sort of balanced because a lot of bosses and even some enemies do 2 mass damage. Even some of the environments do 2 mass damage in Silksong, which was a gripe of mine at first, but once I got a better hang of the combat, it didn't seem to be as much of an issue for me. At least until I met the Belt Beast, who my first playthrough probably took me around 20 tries to beat. On this playthrough, it only took me about 4 or 5. Anyways, that's going to do it for today. If you're new here, please subscribe and leave a comment and let me know what some of the differences you notice in Hollow Knight versus Silksong are, or just tell me your favorite anything about the games. Thanks for watching and have a good day.